We're on a roll here. We started out with a wonderful, wonderful first speaker. And I want to take the pleasure to introduce our second speaker for this morning, Dr. Nancy Morrow-Howell. This is truly an honor for me because not only is Nancy a colleague and professional, Nancy also is is a friend and a former colleague of mine at Washington University in St. Louis. As a matter of fact, she took me to dinner when I interviewed her and got my job there. So it brings back some wonderful memories. Nancy has been at the George Warren Brown School of Social Work since 1987, and she is the Ralph and Muriel Humphrey Professor of Social Work, which she received that honor in 2003. Nancy is a national leader in gerontology, and she's widely known for her work on productive aging and civic engagement in older adults. She edited a book on productive aging that was published by Johns Hopkins Press, and she is a member of the Gerontology Society of American Expert Work Group on Civic Engagement in Older Americans. I looked at her CV last night. She is prolific. She has written a number of articles, millions of dollars of grants to look at this work that she's doing. And when during my days at Washington University, you couldn't find a better colleague and a better mentor for me at the time when I was a junior faculty there. She's a fellow in the Gerontology Society of America. She's chair of the Social Research Policy and Program section of the Gerontology Society of America and the past president of the Gerontology Education and Social Work Initiative. We're really honored to have her come here today and talk about the work that she's doing in productive aging, volunteerism, and civic engagement among older adults. Dr. Nancy Morrow-Howell.
Thank you, Dean Williams. I still miss him a whole lot at WashU. And congratulations on your new endowed chairship. I am honored to be here today and looking forward to really enjoy Dr. Reeder's comments and found them very insightful and important. And like all of us, plan to go home and try to do something a little bit better with a little more energy. Today, I get the privilege of talking about my area of interest, which, as James Herbert says, the productive engagement of older adults. You all know the demographics, and Dr. Reeder went over the demographics. I want to kind of think about the demographics a little bit differently. And we've always been talking about how many older adults will be in this society, how many older adults will be across the globe. But I want us to think about how long, and the meaning of how long for us as individuals and for a society. One thing I do is I keep track of the oldest person that's living, because people don't hold that title real long, so you have to be vigilant about that. So I checked before I came. It's a French woman. The pictures on the website are very bad. She is sitting up here, but it's a very bad picture that you can hardly see. So Eugenia Blanchard is 114. If she makes it to February, she'll be 115. I love to look at old pictures of these people and imagine what their lives have been like. This was my favorite. This was the longest living. This was the record holder two people ago, but she was the last American to hold the longest living person on Earth at the moment record. She is the daughter of her father was born into slavery. You know, just when you hear these stories, it's just amazing, and it always reinstills my love for just thinking about aging and the aging society. Gertrude Baines voted twice in her life. Now remember, her father was born into slavery. She only voted twice in her life, once for John F. Kennedy, and maybe you saw pictures of her voting for Barack Obama. They covered that when they had her coming into the poll and voting. But who's ever lived the longest on this earth? You must know this. French woman, Jean-Louis Calment. Nobody can touch her. For a long time, we didn't have to keep track of the oldest person because she lived out everybody by so long. This human being lived to 122 years and 164 days. So she proved what cell biologists have long been predicting, that the human body can do 120 years. She outlived that. Her only explanation was God had forgotten her. Because she had outlived everyone that she knew and all of her family. And in fact, people have tried to understand what about her life was so remarkable. And one thing that they think is that she was very resilient, stress. She just didn't have a very strong stress response. She was very, very calm about all of the vicissitudes of life. So maybe there's a lesson there. But these clearly are exceptions to the rule. Right now, we know that around the globe in industrial countries, we're pushing a life expectancy of 80. America's not that impressive in terms of its statistics. There's a lot of other countries that are older, and there's other countries that have longer life expectancies. So in general, we can think about living to 80 years of life. And this has provoked the idea that, given that fact, we need to think and act differently about aging in this society. Because generally, we focus on, we're concerned about age drain. And this makes sense. These are very serious challenges. And we have focused on how to worry about our national budget and our healthcare system and overburdening the younger population. At the individual level, we have been focusing on what gerontologists have called the 3 Ds. Our preoccupation with people in need is generally about their needs for care, dealing with dementia, dealing with depression. The productive aging argument is not to discount these important challenges. We need to stay there. As social workers, we need to lead policy and program and training initiatives to try to address these challenges of an aging society. But the productive engagement argument calls us to also respond to the other side of the story, the other reality, and that reality is, in the aging population, there is a lot of capacity. There's a growing amount of capacity. This other reality deals with how many folks, and let's just be saying over the age of 65, although we could talk about that for a long time, we'll just say over the age of 65. These are some statistics, general descriptors, that let us know that most older adults, especially young older adults, are very fit and functioning. They are in good health, and they are having higher and higher levels of education. So this capacity has been viewed as a wealth of human capital, especially when you think that our retirement age has started to go back up a little bit. It's still around 62, 63. It went down precipitously, it's leveled off, it's coming back up a little bit. But in general, people are still retiring in their early 60s, and that means they can expect to live another 20 years, maybe 30 years. That's after formal retirement. We know that these folks are highly motivated to stay meaningfully involved with families and communities. They have high levels of desire for ongoing personal growth. Researchers have documented that people just don't want to keep doing the same. They think that they want to do things differently, but they certainly desire the purpose, the contribution, the engagement in balance with the well-deserved leisure. So the productive aging argument it's really started as an advocacy perspective. We've tried to move it into a scholarship and research agenda, but it started with words like these: maximizing the capacity of the aging population, viewing older adults as a windfall of capacity, seeing all the experience that they've accumulated as this dividend that we could be taking advantage of. And Mark Friedman calls it the only growing natural resource in this country. So these are all advocacy words, but they did, we have developed this idea that a new perspective is needed for us to, as we pay attention to the challenges, pay attention to the older population as part of the solution to those challenges. So we heard more words for a new paradigm, the productive aging paradigm: age as asset, years of experience to be utilized, an abundance of human capital, an opportunity that we're missing if we don't develop programs and policies in response to this aspect of aging. Bob Butler, a wonderful geriatrician who just died, actually coined the word productive aging in the 1980s as an advocacy perspective, mainly to recognize the current capacity of older adults. And the work that's developed since has been how to actually then capture that capacity through programs and policies. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be giving you the big ideas, the productive aging argument, and then a bit about how we've tried to advance those ideas through research and scholarship. One of the first questions that come up is productive aging for who? You know, who's this a good idea for? And we've argued that it's affects multiple levels, not just older adults. It's about families, communities, and society. In fact, I view my work on civic engagement and productive engagement as much about benefiting society as the older adult. That's sort of secondary gain. We know that it's true that being civically engaged is good for older adults, but mostly it's about our communities and our society. So I list these in order of how I think from the most important thing is this about benefits for society. But I'm going to walk through a bit about the ideas about why it might be important for these groups, and then tell you a little bit about where some research exists. For older adults, the MacArthur study of successful aging, you see this reference here, Rowan Kahn. It's getting to be an old book now, but it was a very important book written for general readership, for a lay audience, about what they observed in people who lived healthy lives. And one of the elements that they identified was this: active engagement in life, close personal relationships with friends and family, and then of interest to us, continued involvement in productive activities. So they demonstrated that that was an important element of successful aging. So we thought, well, what does that mean? What kind of activities? How do we support it? What do we need to do to ensure that continued involvement in productive activities? One of the names of their chapters is To Shine in Use, which I think is a nice way to think about how we feel when we are being useful, as opposed to how we feel when we're not being useful. In general, there's evidence that being engaged, productively engaged, produces health and mental health for people. Generally, there's evidence that it increases life satisfaction. We have to be careful about that because as social workers, we know when that's not true. We know when people are in jobs that they would like to not be in, and probably for their mental health and physical health they shouldn't be in. We know the demands of caregiving. So I think we are very aware of when that might not be true. But in general, evidence suggests that ongoing engagement, like this MacArthur study found, is health-producing. We have the idea that it allows older adults to remember our old stage theories of development, and one of the tasks of later life is to be generative, meaning to pass down, to give back, to leave a legacy. The productive engagement and volunteering and civic engagement and family caregiving allow us to do that. And the idea that it allows for intergenerational reciprocity, because mostly older adults are thinking about being productively engaged in ways that matters to communities and to families. So there is some work in writing about how this idea benefits older adults and families. And some of our work that I'll tell you a little bit later shows that. Also benefiting society and communities. Research demonstrates that older adults in general are more reliable, more satisfied workers, and of course the experience that they bring. Corey mentioned at the time now of the economic crisis, older adults are faring pretty well in the workforce because of the experience, retaining the experience. When they lose a job, they're having a much harder time than younger folks coming back in to the job market because of lots of reasons, some of which is age discrimination and concerns about costs associated with the older worker. The rest of these ideas we have yet to really put evidence behind, but the idea is that if people are productively engaged longer, could lead to less reliance on post-retirement income, could lower health care costs if the older population is healthier and more functional because of their involvement. And in regards to civic engagement, a stronger civic society through increased involvement in volunteer roles and participation. So again, arguments for the productive aging. So what is productive aging? We've spent a lot of time talking and arguing about this concept because it turns a lot of people off. Because they say, well, if there's a productive aging, there must be an unproductive aging. Is productivity the highest value of later life? Is this all about economics? And somebody said, you know, don't monetize my grandmother. So we have thought about the dangers of this concept and how we might go awry with it. But I'll tell you first I will tell you about those dangers first. I was going to tell you about our definition, but just with that idea of productive aging, before I use the phrase, there's dangers and opportunities. We're going after the opportunities, but we need to be very aware of the dangers. Carol Estes, one of the great thinkers in gerontology, writes articles about the dangers of this concept. Productive aging, just an extension of market logic. And market logic hasn't done so well for lots of groups of people who haven't been a part of the game. So that worries about individuals being held responsible for their own productivity, their own engagement. The word that worries me the most is further marginalization of disadvantaged older adults. The civic engagement movement that's talked so much about older adults being involved in community and let's get them going and let's have involvement. There's been issues of exclusion because volunteering has largely been an enterprise of people with resources, you know, education and health and some money, some resources that can be given. So we have to be very worried about disadvantaged older adults who might not fare as well under this concept of longer productive engagement. And then the special worry about caregiving, which we clearly include as a productive activity. Doing caregiving without the necessary supports is not something that we would like to be advocating. So Carol Estes said, the aged may find themselves dogged by market judgments to the end of life, in an article that she wrote for our book. And Harry Moody always says, and you can't see that, 2 cheers for productive aging, because the 3rd cheer, doesn't come because of some of these words. So we have had to think about and talk about, is it an oppressive concept? Is it oppressive that we're changing our Social Security maximum benefit age to be 67? Because that is going to hurt some people who cannot work that long in the face of the challenges that they might be facing, for example, in terms of some chronic conditions. So is this going to be an oppressive concept? It's been argued that it might be more oppressive to not take this challenge on, of thinking about engaging people longer in working and in volunteering and in caregiving, because there's going to be more coercion in what happens now. Only the leisure roles available, the discrimination that occurs in regards to engaging older adults in certain roles. So I know I've talked to many an older person, and I think had the same thoughts to myself, that when I step away from a formal job, what are my opportunities? And there's more opportunities, and we're being sucked more into an idea of travel and leisure and what's been called edutainment, education, which we all love, lifelong learning institutes, but it's more about leisure and fun and entertainment. So another side of the story is that it's more oppressive to think about older adults being coerced into leisure roles when there's lack of opportunity for more meaningful engagement. So with all those caveats, we've forged ahead and tried to define productive engagement in later life. And here's how we think about it. It's activities that produce goods and services, whether paid for or not. It's paid and unpaid work. So we include, in a very strict definition, just so we can do research on it in scholarship, employment, paid work, caregiving, unpaid work generally, volunteering, unpaid work, and informal assistance to others, neighboring, mutual aid. That's the activities that we focus on. And we ask the question, Is it good for people? When is it good for people? What outcomes can be achieved for society and for older adults? Other people take much wider definitions, and they'll include self-care, because there's an economic value to that, because if I'm not taking care of myself, someone else might have to be paid to be taken care of for me. Or housekeeping, and so there's lots of other, we're not going to argue about that because there's no one right answer. We just define productive engagement in that way for our research and writing. Also have to address the concern a lot that that's the highest value activity in later life is paid or unpaid work. And we've had to think about that a lot and decided that I think no, it's just one of many activities that are important in a human life. Leisure, spiritual, artistic, relationship development, all very important. Doesn't have to mean that we are not trying to increase those for our clients, ourselves, our families as well. But we focused on one because in the words of Mark Friedman, another person that writes on this topic, all activities might not be created equal for the society, and for communities and families. And if we're thinking beyond older adults, we should look at the unique role of productive engagement in the health of an aging society. So that's our most general research questions that we are trying to push forward. You know, to what extent is in circumstances and context is it good for the older adult in society, therefore worthy of program and policy interventions. We've tried to articulate the values that go along with this thinking in our work. And this has grown a little bit over the years. We think about choice, not coercion, meaningful engagement, not exploitation, opportunity, not obligation, and continued growth and development. The last two are my preoccupation: inclusion, making sure that all older adults may take advantage of this perspective, and intergenerational benefit. I want to share a little bit with you about theory, being a good academic. You all probably have heard of Matilda White Riley if you're a gerontologist. A great old geriatrician that had a lot of wonderful ideas in sociology of aging. And she just promoted the theory of age stratification, how societies structure their opportunities in their institutions around age. So this was her basic picture. We've structured opportunities for youth to educate, and then for adults to work and family, and then older adults, she put leisure, because it wasn't clear, you know, what our major institutions and our expectations are supporting. It's been called the role-less role. I found a picture on the internet that I think expresses some of the structural lag, which is the concept that she put forward, meaning our social structures, our education, our work, they're out of sync with the demographic reality. Our structures, our social structures are lagging behind the demographics. So this is a picture of that. I spent about a half hour, I could spend an hour on this picture. It shows so many things about aging that we could talk about. First thing is I really don't like that it's a man, given the demographics, right? Older adults live, or women live about 7 years longer than men, and we're not looking for that to be reduced particularly. But this is the one I found, and I keep thinking, I gotta pay somebody to make a good picture of this as a woman, because I surely couldn't do it. But this picture, you know, demonstrates the idea that we're not 100% sure what we're supposed to be doing in the third and fourth age of life. You know, we invented the term the third age, right, and that meant later life. Gerontologists are now talking about the third and the fourth age. So I think the first person that's supposed to be our over 65-year-old there probably represents, in my mind, a 65 to 75-year-old, 75 to 85-year-old, over 85-year-old and over. And we know this is the fastest growing element of our population, and we know this is where most of our, not all, but a lot of our clients are when they're faced with the tough situations that come along with the chronic conditions of later life. But our concern is, and this deserves our attention, but our concern is what happens between briefcase man and rocking chair man. That's a long period of life. That's the 20 years we're talking about. And you know, and I think in our society, people think we go from briefcase man to rocking chair man, right? That there's no this time in between. And the productive aging argument says is that's where we need to be concerned about how can that be part of solution? How can that capacity there be engaged for the betterment of society and in general, betterment of older adults. In this picture, I think the portraying is of the 65 to 7-year-old, a bit of what am I supposed to be doing, and then the time and the time. So that's an overstatement, but I think it says a lot about some of the ideas we have about productive engagement of older adults. Here's a picture. We've done some work in China because, as you may know, China's population is just boom. It is becoming so the large, that there's going to be more older adults in China than there are Americans. Totally. I can't remember what year, but in these future predictions that we make, whether it's 2030 or 2050. Anyway, they're on a humongous growth spurt in terms of their older population. Part of that is because of their one-child policy, which has been pretty darn effective. Right? Their replacement rate is very low. In fact, a normal family structure is 4 grandparents, 2 adult kids, and a grandkid, a 4-2-1 structure. So lots of issues of aging in China. So we have done some work on the concept of productive aging and what this might mean for them. If you've been to China, older adults out in parks exercising, wonderful health promotion efforts. But I like to, with my tongue-in-cheek, call this picture all dressed up with no place to go. Because, ironically, mandatory retirement is 55 for women and 60 for men in urban areas. In rural areas where it's mostly about farming, there's no formal retirement. There's people working as long and hard as they can. And the expected role of the grandparent, the given role of the grandparent, is decreasing as there's fewer and fewer kids because of their one-child policy. So the question is what to do with all this capacity, especially as we're promoting it through the health promotion aspects of the society. We think that part of the answer is the structural change that Matilda Riley talked about. Changing programs and policies to increase opportunities for engagement in work and volunteer roles. And transforming work, education, and volunteering institutions, and what's not here, and I don't know why, and supporting caregiving, informal neighboring, and family caregiving through structures that maximize the outcome of that productive activity. This is our conceptual model. Won't go into it all, but we think that without us, the capacity, the individual capacity, the aging population is growing, increased function, and knowledge, and income, and time, all of those things. And without a concerted effort down here, through programs and policies, to change institutions to engage that potential in paid and non-paid work, we're not going to be maximizing the outcomes for an aging society. So that's how we think about it, and we focus our thinking and work on this institutional capacity. What does that mean for our places of work, our nonprofit agencies, our public organizations, our educational institutions? How can we outreach, retain, promote, continue to engage, whatever the word is, older adults? We know that the centrality of choice is a big one. We don't know how to slip that into our model, but we know it's big. Right? Health promoting things usually are things that people do by choice. There's an element of choice in your work. It's a whole lot more health producing if there's not an element of choice in your work. If there's an element of choice in any of these activities, it's probably going to be better for the person. So we're very concerned about this concept, the centrality of choice. And we know that opportunity structures are very much influenced by gender, race, class, and culture. Very much aware of that too, and try to integrate that into our thinking. So I'm not going to tell you all of this except for to say that in the areas of paid and not paid work, focusing on work and volunteering, caring, we're asking these kinds of questions. What are people doing? What context matter to how they're doing? What are their outcomes for themselves and their families? And how can we modify the circumstances to get the best outcome? So those are general. I'm going to talk to you about our work in volunteering and civic engagement where we're asking these questions. But we know, and this is thanks to Jim Beer and another terrific person in gerontology in this country. He introduced the concept of a life portfolio. We all want balance. Older adults really want balance. Nobody's saying, hey, I want to work 10 more years in that same old job, necessarily. They want a different balance. They want paid and unpaid work that is valuable to communities and society to be a part, but they also want other things as well. So we have this notion of, what is the balance that's going to be best in later life for people? We're also concerned about transitions. We know that people pay a penalty now going from paid work to unpaid work, from working to caregiving. We know that volunteering can be a pathway to work. So it's the transitions between productive activities that I think is a very important area for our research. And as I said, we're very interested in reducing disparities in opportunities and outcomes for all types of older adults in regards to working, volunteering, and caregiving. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our work. I have to acknowledge my colleagues and some funders for this work. And unlike, I got to make this clear in front of Corey, I don't have $1 million in grant money, James Herbert.
I said $2 million.
Like everybody else, we work to get our work supported, and I thank these funders. And I thank my wonderful bunch of people. Outcomes of volunteering, lots of work that shows that volunteering is good for people of all ages, right? We do know that healthier people come to volunteering, but then when they come, their health is further promoted. So we've been part of the work that demonstrates that older volunteers experience positive health, mental health, life satisfaction, socialization effects from volunteering. But some of the interesting things are we do find that lower SES folks and ethnic older adults tend to benefit more from this formal engagement in volunteering. So that speaks to some targeting that might be important if we really want to maximize kind of the double win of volunteering, not just getting community needs met, but maximizing their positive engagement. We know that if there's a rippling effect, as in anything else, so we'll talk to families about what it means for them when they're older adults in a civic role that matters. Volunteers talk about bringing information back. They talk about being more internet savvy, for example, just more technological savvy from their experience, and that improves. They talk about being more compassionate. They talk about being better with kids if they're involved, and their grandkids if they're volunteering. So good effects. We just wanted to get the wider effects of volunteering in a cost, an argument about why it's worth the investment. The other thing is when we look at volunteers in institutions like education, like in public education, or like in nursing homes, that experience changes attitudes and makes them more aware and makes them better advocates. So we're thinking about the idea of not just having older adults volunteer in public schools, but then taking their, oh my gosh, I can't believe what teachers have to do with no resources, and how much there is to do with these kids, and changing that into an advocacy, some energy. Maybe they can become the best advocates, for certain of the causes that they have gotten involved in. So lots of effects of volunteering that we can document. But we're mostly interested in how do you get older adults to volunteer, how do you keep them, how do you maximize their experience, how do you maximize the experience for the organization. So one study, we talked to about 13 different organizations that specifically recruited older adults. Like, I'm going to tell you about one particular one that I work with, Experience Corps, that puts older adults in public school, EASY, that puts older adults in communities focused on environment, it's Environmental Alliance for Senior Involvement. You can go on of these programs, but specifically target older adults, put them in the face of a community need. We study what makes that go best. And we're able to document, just like volunteer managers know, but we're able to document with numbers when we talk to a bunch of volunteers in different organizations, that the organizations do matter. And the training and the recognition is related to how long people stay. And the choice and flexibility is the most important thing, to recruiting people. And that transportation is the most, or expense compensation is more important for certain groups of volunteers if we're going to be worried about inclusion. And we have evidence, and stipends are kind of controversial. Some people say it undermines the altruism of volunteering if people get a stipend. We view it as much more, it's important work, it needs to be done, there needs to be people in these schools, we need to get people making big commitments, stipends can do that, and in fact we're able to document that it does increase the diversity of the volunteers, it enables more people to do it, which is a good thing in my book. I'll tell you about one of our, let me see how I'm doing on time. I think I'm doing fine. I got till 10:15, but want to stop. 11:15, but I want to stop in time for questions, so I'm going to keep going. I told you about Experience Corps. This was being touted as a national model. Older adults giving 15 hours a week to go into an urban city school, work with kids, help teachers. I was lucky enough to get money to study that model for its multiple effects. Does it really help the kids, and what are the effects on older adults? Because if we can really document this win-win, maybe we should argue for doing it more and promoting it as a national model. So we accomplished an experiment with the kids. 23 schools in 3 cities, 800 low-reading kids got to randomly assign them into the EC program and test them before and after with standardized tests. Couldn't accomplish that random experiment, which is the most critical way to really establish the outcomes, so hard to achieve. We were able to do a quasi-experimental design. We couldn't randomize. Why? There weren't enough volunteers. There was more kids. We could only get the experiment on the kids side because there was more kids that were referred to the program that could be served, but there were not enough tutors, so we had to let, everyone just needed to come and serve. But we did we established a matching group with some statistics through the Health and Retirement Survey. We matched our measures, we matched our observations, so we could go find some comparable people and compare 2 years worth of this high engagement volunteering. I know you can't see this, but the bottom line is we were able to pick up effects on the kids. If they were reading better, if they were in the EC program compared to kids who had every other thing in the school and any other reading specialist or anything. Obviously we couldn't control that, but not the EC program. We were able to document effects on their reading. The older volunteers, we were able to document that they had improvement in terms of some function and in terms of depression. And that self-rated health, we didn't pick up a clear difference. It was just a marginal difference in terms of self-rated health. But through this experiment, we got to offer some evidence that, yes, this program can help older adults be healthier and it can help the kids read better. So some of this work we've helped try to influence the policy world with other great civic engagement advocates in aging, the Gerontological Society of America and the American Society on Aging. If you may know, if you're into volunteering, that the Service Act, the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act, was passed last spring. We still are waiting for it really happening and being implemented, but it was passed, and it was a huge win for our the scholars that are interested in the practitioners who are interested in this. So we got language in there about all stages of life, better utilizing skill and experience of retirees and baby boomers, because youth. The volunteer programs in this country are so youth-oriented, as they should be. They're so youth-oriented. Older adults have really been excluded from that thinking. So what is so neat about this act, as it gets funded and implemented, is that are you familiar with AmeriCorps, right? So usually youth, usually kind of a college to work transition time, not necessarily. High commitment volunteering, 1 to 2 years of service, for a very small stipend, but for an educational benefit. The other end, I think it's about $5,000 a year now, has to be used towards education. Well, in this new act, 10% of AmeriCorps money now has to go to programs that engage older volunteers. That's big, because right now about 3% of AmeriCorps are people over the age of 55, something very disproportionate to the population. But the big thing is, I'm so excited about the scholarships, the educational scholarships are going to be transferable. So I could volunteer, get my scholarship, give it to a kid, be an adult child by this time, an adult child, a grandchild, or a foster child. And that was never true. So this is a huge innovation in that, incentive to do this and the intergenerational potential. There's also calls for the development of it. It hasn't happened yet. Silver scholarships, where nonprofit and public organizations can get involved in this program if they can document the involvement of 350 hours a year by an older volunteer. That older volunteer gets $1,000 of a silver scholarship, again transferable. So this is the kind of policies that are responding to the idea of a productive aging society to support the ongoing engagement in volunteering. Okay, I'm going to tell you about a couple of things that we have brewing that I think represent this idea in scholarship. The idea of increasing inclusion, focusing on older African Americans as a single group that's underrepresented, older African Americans that are underrepresented in formal volunteering for a lot of reasons. Some reasons because they're otherwise occupied in important unpaid work as caregivers and informal volunteers, higher rates than older white Americans. But there's also been historic discrimination and issues of just lack of disparity in opportunities for serving. But our biggest motivation for addressing this disparity is not because the evidence that it might be a health promoting involvement for these older adults, but that it's a disservice to the schools and to the community, when there's not the representation of older African Americans. For example, a national program that's headquartered in St. Louis, OASIS, runs an intergenerational tutoring program, very successful program across the country. Older African Americans are underrepresented in most places, even in places where the schools, there's no underrepresentation of African American kids, right? So they're just disproportionately represented in the tutoring force. We see that as a disservice to the kids and to the schools, and potentially leading to some health, not attending to the health disparities of older African Americans. So we're working with health communications experts in public health to try to decide what do you say, how do you recruit, what's the message that matters to certain groups of people. The messages matter to different groups of people, and maybe the messages that OASIS gives isn't right. So we're really looking at developing and testing recruitment strategies to bring more African American folks in to this particular program, or programs more generally, hopefully. And then demonstrating the folks who come on this recruitment message stay, just as long, and maybe experience the same kind of health benefits. So that's one area that we're trying to get off the ground. It was funny, I was talking to a person who said, well, I don't think that's going to work. I know just what I'm going to do when I retire. I'm going to work at the, what's it in the airports when you come in and... USO. USO. He said, I'm going to work at a USO. I said, wow, well you just demonstrated my point. How do we find the person who just wants to do that, and hook them up? Because there's got to be better ways to target interests, target, their passions, and get people in. We're thinking about this right now in regards to the Aging Network. I don't know how many of you guys are affiliated with the AAAs or work through the state units and the AAAs. But you know how many agencies rely on volunteers for critical functions, right? For the driving, for the companionship, for the meals, for the translation. And right now in Missouri, at least, there is more demand than supply of these volunteers. And they're worrying that their volunteer force is aging out and that young people aren't coming in. And I must admit, even as being part of the civic engagement movement that I've loved with older adults, it's about finding people that can grant write and program develop and fundraise. We need it. I'm not discounting that. But are we saying we got to find people who drive people around to doctor's appointments? Not really, as we're trying to cater to baby boomers. We got to get baby boomers to want to drive meals and sit with people, etc. So we're right now trying to understand the needs of the Aging Network. Where is the most demands for volunteers? Who is their current supplies? But again, how to appeal to attract and retain older adults? It doesn't have to be older adults. They just need volunteers. But the productive aging argument says that's the people with the capacity, with the desire, with looking for different things. Let's try to target that group and bring them in to meet the fundamental care needs of an aging society. You know, viewing this as part of solution, just as helping kids read better is part of solution in terms of the aging society, meeting fundamental needs of society is also important, but we're not going to get those volunteers, I think, if we don't do something different. So we're just developing this project of, you know, identifying best practices, designing strategy, and evaluating their effectiveness within the arena of the aging network. And one of the criticisms of this, and I even cringe inside a bit when I hear myself talking, is people worry that this whole idea is that we're replacing. No, this needs to be paid for by somebody that's investing, not a volunteer proposition. You know, meeting the fundamental care needs of an aging society is going to be on the backs of older adult volunteers. You know, so that's sort of part of the danger of the concept. So we have to be aware of that as we go forward. Transforming education institutions. It's happening now at community colleges. I wonder here in Colorado if you have any of the movement at the community college to attract and offer classes for older adults. And it's not just for, you know, entertainment and pleasure, but for retooling, for re-careering is a new word, for job development skills. Maybe somebody can tell me about it in the afternoon. Yeah? Right. That's where it's happening in education, is the community college level, and rightfully so, in terms of access and cost. So that's a great new movement that you might want to learn about. There's foundation money in that movement to try to help develop opportunities for older adults. So at the Brown School, not exactly a community college, a lot like your school, expensive private university, you know, what's our role in transforming education to serve an aging society? And one thing that we know is that people are looking to do something different. This idea of re-careering, to do something different in their 50s and 60s, to prepare for another run, you know, people have called it another chapter, where they're doing work that they view as more important to them. And lots of these ideas that they go into education, they go into health care, and they go into social services. And sometimes it's because of an influence of somebody like a social worker. Somebody at our school, and I'm sure you have them here at your school, says, I'm back here, you know, as a 55-year-old because of experience I had in hospice, and I want to do that, and I need an MSW to do that. So we're trying to understand, you know, the potential of our school to really serve this older student. And so right now we're collecting data on alums, and we decided to look at the 40 like it's young, really, really young, but still they're an older student. Right, so an older student, 40 and over, we're interviewing all of our old, our alums who started the program at 40 or above to say why. Why did they decide to come back for an MSW at the age of 40 plus? How was their experience in school? How was their age an asset, and how was their age a barrier? Or did they experience any kind of discrimination, etc.? And then what happened afterwards? What was their career afterwards? How was their age involved in that? So we're just in the middle of that data collection. But we're hoping that we'll learn some things about transforming our institution to serve older people in response to a productive aging society. I want to tell you about one more perspective that we take, the life course perspective. All the gerontologists right know about the life course perspective. And one of the arguments for a productive aging perspective is that if we invest so much in our kids, not enough, but investing in kids to be good public servants, to be good workers, you know, why would we not maximize the return on that investment by stopping providing opportunities for that in later life, which we kind of have. So much now is on youth service, probably at this university like ours. You have to volunteer for credit. You have to volunteer to graduate. Right? And there's so many service learning programs and opportunities. You know, why would we curtail any ongoing involvement in those activities just into the latest phases of life that we can do? So we've talked about youth being a time of building capacity, adults as using capacity, and that's where we've kind of stopped in Matilda Wright Riley's picture. But we say older adults has to be about using that capacity longer, but in doing that we feel like we're honoring capacity. Right? We all know that we do programs that just want to honor older adults and their experience and their contribution. So it's honoring capacity, But what if it does turn out to be one of the best ways to maintain capacity? Wow, that's one of the hugest things that we could do for an aging society. Postponing the disability, and I saw that in Dr. Reeder's presentation, the focus on, preserving function, promoting health. So that's one of the visions of this as well. So we've argued that it's a good investment. Well, we don't know. We need to get the evidence. We're trying to think, how can we ever put some numbers behind this idea that it's a good investment engaged in the human capital of an aging society. We can document various ways, effects on families and communities and individuals, but I would love to move towards a stance that we could really back up with some empirical work, that the active involvement of older adults in social and civic activities might be the best health promotion program that we could come up with. One thing that we've said is that we know that physical activity programs make people healthier, stronger, right? We know that. But we don't know how to get them there, we don't know how to keep them there. Only a very small number of people get those. On the other hand, say, come serve young kids in this public school, and it's good for you too. That's huge. That's such a different perspective about engaging people in health-promoting activities. So we think that that's one of the keys to why this health promotion perspective might be so important. People aren't doing it to make themselves healthier. They're doing it to help something. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with our idea that as a policy principle for an aging society, a social policy principle, is that for the benefit of older adults in society, the ultimate limiting factor for productivity should be individual capacity and interest, the top part of our drawing, not the institutional capacity of our society to provide these roles. So that's the kind of policy and program promotion that we'd like to be doing. And we have time for a little discussion, and I'll leave you with some good pictures of people from the various projects around the country that represent civic engagement.
Thank you, Nancy.
Sure.